The massive space station Nexus Prime floated in the dark void like a giant crystal palace. Its walls sparkled with lights from 1,000 different worlds. Inside the station, strange sounds filled the air as alien beings from across the galaxy talked in their own languages. Some creatures walked on 4 legs, others floated through the air, and some looked like living rocks or flowing water. Ambassador Lee Miho walked slowly through the long corridors. His black diplomatic suit felt heavy on his shoulders. He had been chosen to represent all of humanity at this important meeting. The Grand Convergence only happened once every 100 years, and this time Earth's future hung in the balance. As Miho walked, he passed aliens of every shape and size. A tall blue creature with tentacles for arms nodded at him. A small furry being with 3 eyes scurried past his feet. Giant insect-like aliens clicked their mandibles as they watched him go by. All of them knew why he was here. The central chamber was enormous. The ceiling stretched so high that Miho could barely see the top. Thousands of seats filled the space, each one occupied by a representative from a different world. At the center of it all sat Emperor Kethvar on his floating golden throne. The emperor was terrifying to look at. His body was covered in dark scales, and 6 red eyes glowed on his massive head. Sharp claws extended from his hands, and when he spoke, rows of pointed teeth showed in his mouth. For over 10,000 years his people, the Vortax, had ruled the galaxy through fear and violence. Miho felt his heart beating fast as he entered the chamber. Behind him, Dr. Park Sumin and the other members of Earth's small delegation took their seats. Sumin gave him an encouraging nod, but her face was pale with worry. The Emperor's voice filled the chamber like thunder. Universal translators made sure every being could understand his words. Today we welcome the newest species to seek membership in our great empire. The humans of the small planet called Earth. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some aliens looked curious, others seemed bored. A few appeared sympathetic as if they remembered their own people's first meeting with the Vortax long ago. For thousands of years, the Emperor continued, peace has existed in our galaxy because every species knows their place. The strong rule, the weak serve. This is the natural way of things. Miho walked forward until he stood alone in the center of the chamber. Above him, the Emperor's throne slowly descended until they were face to face. The alien ruler's red eyes studied the human carefully. Your species is young, Emperor Kethvar said, his voice slightly softer but still commanding. You have barely learned to travel between stars. You have no great fleets, no powerful weapons, no ancient wisdom. You are weak, and weakness must bow to strength. The chamber fell completely silent. Even the quiet humming of the station's machines seemed to stop. 10,000 pairs of eyes, tentacles, and other sensory organs focused on the small human figure. The species called humans will now accept their place in the natural order, the Emperor announced, his voice booming once again. Kneel before the throne and pledge eternal servitude to the Vortak Empire. Your people will mine our minerals, grow our food, and serve our needs. In return we will allow you to live. Miho felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He thought about Earth, his home planet with its blue oceans and white clouds. He thought about his family, his friends, and all the humans living on colonies scattered across nearby star systems. They were all counting on him. The Emperor leaned forward on his throne. Well, human? What is your answer? Around the chamber, aliens held their breath. Some had been in this same position centuries or millennia ago. They remembered the fear, the helplessness, the moment when their own people had been forced to choose between freedom and survival. Almost all of them had chosen survival. Dr. Park Sumin watched from the Earth delegation, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She had worked with Miho for years and she knew him to be a careful, thoughtful man. But she also knew he had a stubborn streak when it came to doing what he believed was right. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Miho looked up at the massive alien ruler. He thought about all the civilizations that had knelt before this throne. He thought about the billions of beings who had given up their freedom to save their lives. Then he thought about humanity's history. Humans had always been fighters. They had fought against nature, against each other, and against impossible odds. They had never been the strongest or the smartest, but they had always refused to give up. Lee Miho straightened his shoulders and looked directly into the Emperor's 6 red eyes. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear enough for everyone in the chamber to hear. No. The single word seemed to hang in the air like a physical thing. Some aliens gasped in shock. Others made sounds of disbelief in their own languages. A few seemed to smile, if their alien faces were capable of such expressions. Emperor Kethvar's eyes blazed with fury. His claws dug into the arms of his throne, leaving deep scratches in the gold. What did you say? He demanded. Miho never looked away from those burning red eyes. I said no. Humanity will remain free. The single word no seemed to bounce off the walls of the great chamber like an echo that would never die. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The silence was so complete that Lee Miho could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Then the chaos began. Alien delegates throughout the chamber started making sounds of shock and disbelief. Some gasped with mouths that had too many teeth. Others clicked their claws nervously against their seats. A few made high-pitched whistling noises that their translators could not convert into words. The sound grew louder and louder until it filled the entire space. Emperor Kethvar's 6 red eyes burned brighter than stars. His massive hands gripped the arms of his floating throne so hard that the golden metal began to bend. When he spoke again, his voice was like the growl of an angry beast. What did you say, human? Lee Miho did not step back, even though every instinct in his body told him to run. He kept his voice calm and steady. I said no. Humanity will remain free. The Emperor's rage was terrible to see. His scaled face twisted with fury, and his sharp teeth showed in a snarl. Around the chamber, some of the smaller alien delegates actually hid behind their seats in fear. But something else was happening too. As the news of the humans' refusal spread through the station's communication systems, it began to travel beyond Nexus Prime. Faster than light signals carried the message across the galaxy to thousands of worlds. On the human colony ship Busan Dream, Captain Kim Daeho was drinking coffee in his quarters when the emergency transmission came through. He nearly dropped his cup when he heard what had happened. A slow smile spread across his weathered face. Signal all ships in the fleet, he ordered his communications officer. Tell them to stand ready for anything. And send a message to Earth Command. Tell them our ambassador just made the bravest speech in human history. Far away on the mining world of Kepler 442b, Engineer Cho Minji was deep underground when she heard the news. She was working alongside aliens from many different species, all of them digging precious metals from the planet's core. The work was hard and dangerous, and the Vorthak overseers were cruel masters who punished anyone who worked too slowly. When the broadcast reached their mining station, Minji stopped her drilling machine and listened in amazement. Around her, other miners began to whisper excitedly. A tall purple alien with 4 arms looked at her with something like respect in his large eyes. Your people have courage, he said in broken standard language. Minji felt something she had not experienced in years of hard labor under Vorthak rule. She felt hope. Even the Vorthak overseers seemed different somehow. They still carried their shock weapons and barked orders, but they kept glancing nervously at the alien workers. For the first time in decades, the slaves outnumbered their masters and everyone knew it. Back in the great chamber of Nexus Prime, the shock was spreading through the alien delegates like ripples in a pond. Dr. Park Soo-min watched from her seat as representatives from dozens of species began having quiet, urgent conversations with each other. The ambassador from the Helix Collective, a creature that looked like a living spiral of silver metal, was clicking rapidly in what Soo-min recognized as the alien equivalent of nervous laughter. Near the front row, the representative of the Starwing Republic spread her beautiful crystalline wings wide. The gesture looked like pure excitement. Some delegates seemed frightened by what they had witnessed. They kept looking toward the exits as if they wanted to leave before something terrible happened. But others appeared inspired. They sat up straighter in their seats and looked at Lee Miho with new interest. Emperor Kethvar slowly rose from his floating throne. His massive form cast a shadow over the human ambassador below. When he spoke, his voice was filled with cold promise. Then humanity will burn, he said. Each word was like ice. I will summon every war fleet in the Empire. I will gather every weapon we possess. Your pathetic species will serve as an example to anyone else who thinks they can defy the natural order. The Emperor turned toward his own delegates and roared orders in the harsh Vorthak language. Summon Admiral Zekthor immediately. Tell him to mobilize the entire Imperial Navy. I want every human world turned to ash within the month. As the Emperor stormed from the chamber with his guards following behind, the remaining delegates sat in stunned silence. Some looked terrified, others seemed thoughtful, and a few appeared almost hopeful. Lee Miho stood alone in the center of the great space. He felt very small and very human surrounded by all these alien beings, but he also felt proud of what he had done. He turned slowly to address the thousands of delegates still in their seats. His voice carried clearly through the chamber's acoustics. We don't ask anyone to fight with us, he said. We don't expect you to risk your own people for ours. We only ask that you remember this moment. Remember that today someone said no to tyranny. Remember that it is possible to choose freedom over safety. Dr. Park Soo-min felt tears in her eyes as she watched her colleague. She knew that he had probably just signed humanity's death warrant. But she also knew that he had done something more important than saving their species. He had shown the galaxy that resistance was possible. As the delegates began to leave the chamber, many of them glanced back at the lone human figure. Some looked at him with pity, expecting his species to be extinct within weeks. But others looked at him with something else entirely. They looked at him with respect. 3 weeks had passed since the meeting at Nexus Prime, and the entire galaxy was holding its breath. News of humanity's refusal had spread to every corner of known space, carried by traders, travelers, and communication networks that spanned thousands of light years. Admiral Zekthor stood on the bridge of his massive flagship, the Destroyer of Worlds. Around him, holographic displays showed the largest military fleet ever assembled in Vorthack history. Over 10,000 warships stretched across space like a metal storm cloud, ready to crush the small human resistance. But something was wrong. The Admiral's aide, a nervous young Vorthack officer named Veltar, approached with yet another troubling report. His scales were pale with worry as he spoke. "Sir, the Quantum Miners Guild is refusing to provide rare metals for our weapon systems," he said quietly. Admiral Zekthor's 6 eyes narrowed dangerously. "What did you say?" "They have supplied our military for over 2,000 years. They have never refused before. They claim they are having technical difficulties with their extraction equipment," Veltar explained. "All of their mining operations have suddenly broken down at the same time." The Admiral's claws scraped against the metal railing of his command platform. This was not the first strange report he had received today. Similar problems were appearing all across Vorthack space like a plague of inconvenience. The Stellar Navigation Union, which had guided Vorthack ships through hyperspace for centuries, was now experiencing mysterious computer errors in their jump calculations. Every time a war fleet tried to plot a course to human space, their navigation systems would malfunction. Food suppliers across the Empire were having unexpected shipping delays. Fuel refineries were reporting equipment breakdowns. Communications networks were suffering from technical problems that their engineers claimed they had never seen before. Even more troubling were the reports coming from Vorthack-controlled worlds. On dozens of planets, alien workers were calling in sick or simply not showing up for their jobs. Mining operations were running at half capacity. Factory production had slowed to a crawl. "Sir," another officer called from across the bridge. "We're receiving reports that our supply ships are being delayed at every stop. The cargo handlers are working much more slowly than usual." Admiral Zekthor slammed his fist on the command console. "This cannot all be coincidence. Someone is organizing this resistance." Far away on Earth, Dr. Yoon Jaiwoo was working around the clock in the Planetary Defense Center. Banks of computers and communication equipment filled the underground bunker where she and her team were preparing for the coming war. General Nam Taeyong, the head of Earth's military forces, studied the reports coming in from across the galaxy. His weathered face showed both concern and amazement. "I don't understand," he said to Dr. Yoon. "These alien species aren't sending us weapons or ships. They're not forming any kind of military alliance with us. What exactly are they doing?" Dr. Yoon looked up from her computer screen, her eyes tired but hopeful. "They're not fighting with us," she explained carefully. "But they're also not helping the Vorthacks. Every small act of resistance, every delayed shipment, every broken machine, it's all adding up." "But why?" the general asked. "Why would they risk Vorthack anger for a species they barely know?" "Because someone finally showed them that it was possible to say no," Dr. Yoon replied. Ambassador Lee Miho didn't just refuse to kneel. He proved that the Vorthacks could be defied. While the galaxy quietly stirred with small acts of rebellion, Lee Miho himself was traveling secretly between neutral worlds. His diplomatic ship, the Busan Dawn, was small and fast, designed to avoid detection by Vorthack patrol vessels. He was not trying to build a military coalition against the Empire. Instead, he was doing something much simpler and perhaps more powerful. He was telling humanity's story. On the water world of Aquatica Prime, he met with the Tide Riders, an ancient race of ocean dwellers who had been conquered by the Vorthacks 500 years earlier. They gathered in their underwater cities to listen as the human ambassador spoke. "We know what it's like to be told we're too small, too young, too weak to make our own choices," Miho said, his words translated into their flowing musical language. "We understand the feeling of being dismissed as unimportant." The Tide Riders listened with their large, intelligent eyes fixed on this strange visitor from a distant world. Some of them remembered when their own people had first encountered Vortac ships in their skies. On the desert planet Sandros, Miho addressed the Crystal Builders, a species that created beautiful living structures from the minerals in their world's sand. They had been forced to use their artistic skills to build weapons and fortifications for the Empire. "We understand the feeling of being overlooked," he told them as they gathered in their crystalline halls. "We know what it means to have others decide your fate without asking what you want." Captain Lee Young-ho commanded the human exploration vessel Soul's Light. He had been ordered to patrol the edges of human space and watch for the approaching Vortac fleet. But what he found surprised him more than any enemy armada could have. Ships were appearing near human colonies. Not warships or military vessels, but trading ships, mining craft, exploration vessels, and passenger transports. They came from dozens of different species, carrying crews who had heard about the humans who dared to say no. "Captain," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving messages from over 300 ships. They're asking for permission to enter human space." "What do they want?" Captain Lee asked. "They say they want to witness what happens next. Some of them say they want to help, but most just say they want to be here when history changes." The galaxy was stirring like a sleeping giant beginning to wake up. The massive Vortac War fleet dropped out of hyperspace like a metal storm cloud at the edge of Earth's solar system. Admiral Zekthor stood on the bridge of his flagship, expecting to see a few small human ships scattered helplessly before his overwhelming force. Instead, his sensors showed something impossible. Thousands of ships filled the space around Earth. Not just human vessels, but craft from hundreds of different alien species. Trading ships, mining vessels, exploration craft, and passenger transports from across the galaxy had gathered in Earth's defense. "Sir," his communications officer called out nervously, "we're receiving a transmission from the humans." The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of a human warship. Captain Kim Dae-ho appeared, wearing the dark blue uniform of Earth's defense forces. His face was calm but determined. "Admiral Zekthor," Captain Kim said politely, "you still have time to turn your ships around and leave. No one needs to die today." The Admiral's 6 red eyes blazed with fury. How dare this primitive human speak to him as an equal? "You think your collection of merchant vessels frightens me?" he snarled, showing his sharp teeth. "I have conquered 1,000 worlds. Your pathetic fleet is nothing compared to Vortac power." "No," said another voice, and Dr. Park Soo-min stepped into view beside the human captain. "But you might want to look at your own fleet before you attack us." Admiral Zekthor spun around to face his command deck, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Chaos was erupting throughout his massive ship. Officers were shouting, alarms were blaring, and his crew members were arguing with each other. "Sir," called his aide Veltar, his voice high with panic, "we're receiving urgent messages from across the Empire. Rebellions have broken out on dozens of worlds. The subject species are refusing to obey orders." All around the Admiral's bridge, alien crew members who had served the Vortac Empire for decades were putting down their weapons. These were members of species that had been conquered long ago, forced to serve aboard Vortac ships as part of their enslavement. Commander Yextal, a tall blue alien from the Void Runner species, approached the Admiral slowly. His people had been conquered 300 years ago, and he had served faithfully in the Vortac military ever since. But now something had changed in his large silver eyes. "Sir," Commander Yextal said respectfully but firmly, "with all due respect, we are done fighting for your empire." "What?" Admiral Zekthor roared. "You swore an oath of service." "We swore that oath because we had no choice," the commander replied. "But today we learned that choice is possible. The humans showed us that." Similar scenes were playing out across the entire Vortac fleet. On ship after ship, alien crew members were refusing to fight. Some were members of conquered species who had served the Empire for generations. Others were Vortac citizens who had grown tired of their government's endless wars. The Admiral watched in horror as entire sections of his fleet began to drift away from the formation. Ships were changing course, heading toward the growing collection of vessels around Earth. "All ships," he commanded desperately, "open fire on the human fleet immediately." But less than half of his vessels responded. Many of his captains were too busy dealing with rebellions on their own ships to follow orders. Others simply refused to attack. The battle that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. It was brief but decisive, not because of superior weapons or tactics, but because one side simply fell apart. Lieutenant Park Jimin watched from the bridge of the human destroyer Incheon's Fury as Vortac ships began switching sides in the middle of the fight. Alien vessels that had been part of the invasion fleet moments before were now joining the coalition around Earth. "Captain," she reported in amazement, "3 more Vortak cruisers are requesting permission to join our formation." "Granted," her captain replied, shaking his head in disbelief. "I never thought I'd see the day when enemy ships would defect during battle." The turning point came when Emperor Kethvar himself arrived in his massive dreadnought, the Heart of Darkness. The ship was the size of a small moon, armed with weapons that could destroy entire planets. Surely his personal presence would rally the fleet and crush this human rebellion. Instead, the Emperor found his forces in complete chaos. Admiral Zekthor's flagship was drifting powerless through space, half its crew having abandoned their posts. Dozens of ships were flying toward Earth to join the defenders. Others were simply leaving the battle area entirely, their crews refusing to fight. "What is happening here?" the Emperor demanded as he contacted Admiral Zekthor. The Admiral's image appeared on screen, his scales pale with shock. "Your Majesty, the fleet is falling apart. The subject species are refusing to obey. Even some of our own people are joining the rebellion." Emperor Kethvar's rage was terrible to see. His 6 eyes burned like stars, and his voice shook the bridge of his dreadnought. "Then I will destroy the humans myself." But as his massive ship moved toward Earth, something unprecedented happened. His own crew began to abandon their posts. Aliens who had served the Empire faithfully for decades were walking away from their stations. Even some Vortaks were laying down their weapons, tired of fighting wars for an empire built on fear and oppression. Lieutenant Park Jimin watched from her ship as the mighty Heart of Darkness, abandoned by half its crew, slowly turned away from Earth and limped into hyperspace. The Emperor's flagship disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind the wreckage of his once mighty fleet. "The bigger they are," she murmured to herself, "the harder they fall." The age of Vortak rule was over. 6 months had passed since the great battle at Earth, and the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have imagined. The massive space station Nexus Prime looked the same from the outside, but inside everything was different. Representatives from thousands of worlds gathered once again in the great central chamber. But this time they did not come as subjects bowing before a master. They came as equals, free beings choosing to work together for the good of all. The universal throne still sat in the center of the chamber, but it was empty. No one had destroyed the golden seat of power. It simply sat unused, a reminder of the old ways that the galaxy had chosen to leave behind. Lee Miho stood at a simple podium where the throne used to hover. He wore the same black diplomatic uniform he had worn 6 months ago, but now he carried a new title. He was the first speaker of the Free Worlds Coalition, elected by representatives from across the galaxy. "My friends," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber, "we gather today not as rulers and subjects, but as partners in building a better future. We never sought to conquer anyone. We only wanted to remain free. And in choosing freedom, we discovered we were not alone." The audience listened with attention and respect. Among them sat beings who had once been bitter enemies. Former Admiral Zekthor now represented the newly formed Vortak Democratic Territories. The proud military officer had traded his uniform for the simple robes of a civilian leader. After the fall of Emperor Kethvar, the Vortak Empire had collapsed completely. Some Vortak worlds had chosen to join the Free Worlds Coalition. Others had formed their own small governments. A few had even asked for help in learning how to hold elections for the first time in their history. Zekthor nodded respectfully as Lee Miho spoke. The former admiral had spent months learning about democracy and freedom. It was hard work for someone who had spent his entire life following orders, but he was determined to help his people find a new way to live. On Mars, Dr. Yoon Jaiwoo was busy with her own important work. She had established the first interspecies academy, a school where young beings from across the galaxy could learn together. The Red Planet's dome cities now housed classrooms filled with an amazing variety of students. Human children sat next to young Vortaks who were learning to live without emperors. Tide Rider youngsters from the ocean worlds played with Crystal Builder children from the desert planets. They all learned the same lessons about cooperation, respect, and the importance of freedom. "Today we will study the history of the Great Refusal," Dr. Yoon told her mixed class of students. "Can anyone tell me what Ambassador Lee Miho said that changed everything?" A young Vortak raised her clawed hand. "He said no," she answered in careful Standard Galactic. "He said no when everyone expected him to say yes." "That's right, Velana," Dr. Yoon smiled. "And why was that word so important?" A human boy named Jean raised his hand. "Because it showed everyone that they could choose freedom instead of just accepting whatever the powerful people told them to do." Dr. Yoon nodded proudly. These children would grow up in a galaxy very different from the one their parents had known. Far out at the edge of known space, Captain Lee Young-ho commanded the exploration vessel Soul's Promise. His ship was mapping new regions of space that no empire had ever reached. But what made his mission special was not just the places they were going, but the crew that was taking them there. His communications officer was Commander Yextao, the former Vortak officer who had refused to fight at the Battle of Earth. The tall blue alien had proven to be excellent at making first contact with newly discovered species. "Captain," Yextao reported from his station, "we're receiving signals from the fourth planet in this system. It appears to be a young civilization that has just developed radio technology." "Excellent," Captain Lee replied. "Prepare the standard greeting. Let them know we come in peace and friendship, not conquest." This was the new way of exploring space. Instead of claiming new worlds for an empire, they simply made contact and offered friendship. If the new species wanted to join the Free Worlds Coalition, they were welcome. If they preferred to remain independent, that choice was respected too. Back on Earth, Lee Miho stood in his office looking out at the night sky. The stars seemed brighter somehow, filled with new possibilities instead of old fears. Dr. Park Soo-min joined him at the window, carrying 2 cups of hot tea. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had said yes that day?" she asked quietly. Miho took the tea gratefully and considered the question. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I remember something my grandfather used to tell me when I was young. He said, a person who won't stand up will never know how tall they really are." Dr. Park smiled. "Your grandfather was a wise man." "He was a farmer," Miho replied. "But he understood that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with simple courage." Across the galaxy, in classrooms and homes on thousands of worlds, children were learning the story of the day when one word changed everything. They learned that empires built on fear were always more fragile than they appeared. They learned that even the smallest voice could make the biggest difference. Most importantly, they learned that sometimes the greatest revolutions begin not with armies or weapons, but with the simple courage to say no when everyone expects you to kneel. The universe had been ruled by a throne of terror for thousands of years. But it had taken just one word from humanity to teach an entire galaxy how to stand tall and free.